Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. In particular, I'd like to talk about some changes that I'll be making based on things that the viewer has recently told me that they want in the game. So as you can see, I've started a combat here. We have the player character has advanced almost up to the single enemy that we're facing. And we have all of the options, but there's one missing. We have retreat, shoot and pistol whip. We have give an order, but normally we'd also have advance. We'd have the option to move one forward. So we're sort of here, and we'd have the option to move here where the enemy is. But one of the things that the viewer has told me they want is that the enemies won't move into spaces where the player character is and the player character and companions are, and similarly the companions and the player character can't move into spaces where the enemy is. So there's sort of a front line here and here. They can't move past there. And because of how the game is coded, I'm going to have to do separate changes for the player character and then the companions and then the enemies, because their movements of those three types is all coded separately. And I have currently done the player characters one, and that's what I'm going to show you. So as you can see, there's no advance, but if I choose to retreat, well, now I do have the advance option because this space is clear, and so I can move into that. I can also retreat into this distance band because there's no problem having the player character and the companion in the same place. It's only having people from the two different sides that is something that he didn't want. So I can just advance back there, and then the combat continues. So that's what I've done, and let's have a look at how it works. So as I say, as you can see, and as would be obvious if you've been following the series, the player character's actions, the companion's actions, and the enemy's actions are all coded basically separately. There is one bit of code that's common to the player character and the companion when they're attacking, but they're pretty much three separate sections. And so I'm going to have to code this change sort of separately each time. So how do we do it for the player character? Well, this is probably the easiest one, I would think. Let's get into here. It's done in this one, I think, from memory. Yep, it is. And there aren't any new variables. It's just a new bit of code. So here we are in the section of code where we print the buttons that are the options for the orders that the player character can give. And one of those is advance, and one of those is retreat. And all we've done is we make displaying the advance button conditional on a particular variable, and then we have, before that, we have a bit of code where we set that variable. And I've chosen $Z arbitrarily to be that variable, and there's a little note here that says set to 1 if any enemies are at distance 1. So you'll remember, perhaps, or at least if you've been following the series, you'll remember that the player character's position is always 0. Everyone else's position is relative to the player character. So if the player character moves, they're still at 0, just everyone else's position changes. And that makes this quite easy, because all we have to do is say, well, because the enemies are always in the positive range bands, we just have to say, well, if there's any enemy in position 1, then the player character can't advance. It's as simple as that. So we have, we set Z to 0, and we have a for loop which goes from 1 to enemy underscore max, which is the maximum number of enemies. And then for each of those enemies, we look in the enemy array, which of course again is short for enemy and keeps track of various things about the enemy. Specifically, we ask, is enemy y2 greater than 0? Well, enemy something 2 is enemy something 2 is their hit points. So when we ask, are their hit points greater than 0, we mean, is this an enemy that's actually in the fight? If their hit points are not greater than 0, that means either that enemy has been killed, or it means that enemy was never in the fight to start with. Because remember, we're going to enemy max, and that's the maximum number of enemies. But there may well be, and often probably usually will be, fewer than that number of enemies in a given fight. So if enemy y2 is greater than 0 and enemy y3 is equal to 1, enemy y3 is the position of enemy number y. And if those are both the case, if we have an enemy that is alive in the fight and at position 1, well then that means the player character can't advance, and so we set z equal to 1. And then that means that when we ask, is z equal to 0, well, it won't be if it's been set to 1, and so therefore this code won't execute, and therefore we won't have, or the player won't have a button to advance. But they can always retreat because at the moment, this may change. This is another thing that I'll be working on, but at the moment, the player character and possibly companions come in from one end and the enemies come in from the other. There might be a possibility of being sort of outflanked and trapped and having enemies on two sides, but that's something we'll deal with when we come to it. So that's how we deal with what the viewer wanted in terms of the player character's movement. Coming up, of course, I'll be doing it for the enemies and the companions, not sure which order. And then once we've done that, I have another change I need to make, which is limiting the size of the combat space and dealing with what happens at the edges. Can people move off the edge and therefore they run away? Or is it like a wall that they can't move past? Well, it'll be different in different environments. I know that I've sort of stopped doing, I was doing these orders and I've done 3 of them out of the 4, but the 4th one, I sort of can't do it until I've made these changes about the sort of boundaries of the space because of what the order is. But we'll see what that is when we come to it. For now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.